Hi, everyone. My name is Manu Quadros. I'm a PhD student in linguistics at Yale University. And today I'll be moderating Professor Jenny Audring's talk. This talk is part of Abra Linha ao Vivo, Linguists Online, an event organized by the Brazilian Linguistics Association in partnership with several international organizations, including the Permanent International Committee of Linguists, the Association of Latin American Linguistics and Philology, the Argentinian Linguistic Society, the Spanish Linguistic Society, the Linguistic Association of America, the Linguistics Association of Great Britain, the Australian Linguistic Society, and the British Association for Applied Linguistics. I'm honored to introduce Professor Jenny Audring. She earned her PhD from the Vrije Universiteit Amsterdam in 2009, and currently is a university lecturer and researcher at Leiden University, and a prolific researcher in the areas of grammatical gender and linguistic morphology, among other areas of morphology. More recently, she has been exploring a novel theory of morphology called Relational Morphology in a series of papers and a book written with Ray Jackendoff. Her talk today is called Unproductive Morphology. And thank you so much, Professor Jenny Audring, for giving this talk. And it's a great pleasure to have you here.
Thank you very much, Manu. And also, thank you for the invitation to participate in this wonderful lecture series, which has brightened our linguistic life in Corona times. So a big thank you to the organizers. I will try to share my screen now. Yeah. So one of the grand masters of morphology, Mark Aronoff, has a wonderful book chapter with the title, "A Fox Knows Many Things, but a Hedgehog One Big Thing." This is an allegory that goes back all the way to antiquity, and it's interpreted here as follows. A hedgehog seeks a unifying theory, a coherent big picture, while a fox loves detail and particulars. And Aronoff says that morphology is an ecosystem in which foxes thrive. And in this talk, I will argue that morphology could be even foxier, I think, and also that we should be looking for ways in which foxes and hedgehogs communicate better. Because as part of the generativist legacy, there is also in morphology a strong focus on systematic, on paradigmatic, on productive phenomena. So on possible words, the way syntactic theory is about possible sentence structures. But of course, in morphology, we're also dealing with existing words, the lexicon, and morphological theories actually differ quite markedly in the extent to which they regard the lexicon as part of their responsibility. And also, there's quite a disconnection between descriptive morphology and typology on the one hand, the foxes, if you like, and morphological theory, the hedgehogs, on the other. So when Francesca Massini and I, we edited the Oxford Handbook of Morphological Theory, we had a very hard time finding an author for the chapter Morphological Theory and Typology. Eventually, Peter Arkadiev and Marian Klamer wrote this chapter, and it's actually one of my favorite chapters in this book. But these approaches are not as well connected as we would like them to be. So this talk is going to be very foxy. It's also going to be very hedgehoggy, and I'll be championing for the underdog, so for complex words that are normally set aside as lexicalized and therefore maybe not theoretically interesting. So we're in the territory of the lexicon, but again, I'll be arguing that we have not left morphology and we aren't excused from taking care of such words in morphological theory. Here's a brief outline. We look at a number of types of unproductive morphology. This is the foxy part. Then we'll see what theoretical challenges they pose. Then I will propose or introduce a model of morphology that we think takes care of those. And then we'll broaden out again to include also productive morphology. This is joint work with Ray Jackendoff, who had an Abralin Ao Vivo talk in June on similar issues. So for those of you who have heard this talk, some of the parts will come back, but I hope it bears repeating. There are also close ties to Geert Boy's construction morphology. So I will call this a sister theory later. And Ray and I have a pretty book, which came out last winter. And if you want to know more about these things I'll be talking about, or Ray talked about in June, then have a look at this book. There's a lot more in there. So what do I mean when I talk about unproductive morphology? I mean complex words that haven't been or cannot be generated spontaneously for some reason or another. So I'll be taking a very synchronic, strict view of productivity as spontaneous generation of online generation, creation of words. So in a way, these are words that IKEA cannot deliver in parts. They have to be delivered as a whole. And actually, these are words that are already in your living room. And I would say that this happens in 4 circumstances at least. One is that the parts may not be available in isolation. The second, that the parts or the whole words may have an unpredictable meaning. Third, that the parts or the whole words may have an unpredictable form. And finally, it may happen that the procedure that creates these words is not available. And we'll look at those one by one. So we'll start with the situation that the parts are not available. So this means parts of words that have no independent existence and therefore cannot serve as building blocks from the perspective, again, of the present day language user. So this is a very synchronic view. So here's a language user who knows nothing of history, linguistic history and etymology. This is the perspective I'll be taking. And the most famous case where this happens is, of course, in what has been called cranberry morphs, and I'm sure you will know about these. So these are compounds that have a component that is not an independent word. So for English, this would be cran and cranberry, mull and mulberry, were and werewolf, mare and mermaid, and so on. There's only one in this list that has the cranberry morph on the right side, and that is iceberg, but I'm sure this is not a complete list. By the way, here, as well as for the rest of the talk, I'll just be showing you examples, and these examples will all be from Germanic, mostly from English, for several reasons. First, because these are the languages I know most about. Also, because English is actually a very nice language to do this kind of research on, especially because of the massive non-native vocabulary. And third, because I'm trying to tell you that this is an underestimated kind of thing here. So, and this is probably best appreciated if this is a language that you speak yourself. So, cranberry morphs. This is one example where a complex word cannot be formed because we don't have the parts. We have the part berry, but we don't have the part cran and all the other, or the same thing for the other words here. Cranberry morphemes also appear in derivation, so in affixation, and here they are often called bound roots. So we see these, for example, in ugly. So ugly looks like it has an affix, but the root is not a word. There's no kempt in unkempt, no wreck and ruth in reckless and ruthless. A plumber and carpenter look like complex words, but we don't have the base. And of course, there are many more of those as we move to the Latinate vocabulary in English. So receive, sieve and receive, pel and propel, struct and construct, and so on. These are all parts of words that are not available in isolation. I couldn't resist adding an example from Dutch and German, which is a little funny because it's a word that means the same thing. It means fairy tale. And it's a bound root in both cases, but it's different roots. So neither meer nor sprook are currently words of Dutch or German, but we can still see that there is a morphological structure here. And actually we can be surer of this than perhaps even in English, because these words are diminutives and they also behave like diminutives. So they have neuter gender, like a normal diminutive should. And also they take the plural that is expected of such nouns. So here we know that these are definitely complex words, even though we're missing the base. Bound roots, like we just saw, can form families. So of course for plumber, we also have plumbing. This is just a pair. But here's a bigger family that you may not have noticed in English. This is something that morphologists notice. So here's the root hap, which happens in hapless, in happy, in mishap, in happen, in happenstance, and perhaps. So here's a whole family of words, but still we do not have the root hap by itself. So we cannot construct these words from scratch. They have to be stored in their entirety in our lexical memory. And the biggest family that Ray and I were able to find is the hor family. So with the words horror and horrid and horrible, horrific, horrendous, horrifying, and abhor. This is the biggest root family, but again, the situation is the same. The root is not a word in English. What's interesting is that they are affixes that combine often or maybe exclusively with bound roots, and not only in the non-native vocabulary. So here is a personal favorite of mine, that is the suffix -il, the verbal -il, which is a diminutive or iterative, frequentative suffix that is often overlooked in English, but in fact there are around 250 words that have this suffix. And some of them have a lexical root, so like sparkle or nestle or crackle or crumble. We can see a noun in here in this complex word. But the rest of the list, most of the words on the list, actually don't have a lexical root. So amble, baffle, boggle, burble, and so on. All of these have bound roots. So this is a typical situation with this particular affix. And here is an especially dramatic situation. Now we are really in borrowed morphology. Another pattern that you may not have noticed, I hadn't before we started working on this. So English has affixes, borrowed affixes, adjectives, with the suffix id, like candid, fervid, horrid, and so on. And many of those have a sister word, a noun, in or. So you have get, candid, candor, fervid, fervor, and so on. The semantics isn't always exactly parallel. So stupid and stupor are not exactly 100% connected semantically, and also liquid and liquor are not. Also the phonology is not always exactly the same. But you can see a relation between these words. They have the same base. And the base is, in all cases, a bound root, with perhaps the sole exception of pallid and pallor, where you might see pale in it, if you have a little imagination. And again, we are talking about present-day speakers trying to make sense of their lexicon. So this is not about etymology. This is about organizing the words in your mind. So far, we've been looking at roots that are unavailable as units. And now we're looking at affixes that are not available. Also, these also exist. And Ray and I call them hapax affixes because they're affixes that actually occur in only one word, or maybe two or three. Here's a little list. So there's tur and laughter. That is almost unique. There's also slaughter. Perhaps this is the same suffix. The relation between bomb and bombard is unique. Hero and heroine, compare and comparison, bishop and bishopric. Hate and hatred, there's kindred, perhaps the second instantiation here. There's know and knowledge, and there's happen and happenstance, which may actually be a compound, but we cannot be sure because we don't have stance either. But we have the intuition here that this is a complex word anyway. Here are two very small families of this type, one from English that is nominal rel, that comes up in scoundrel and wastrel and perhaps in mongrel, and there may be a couple of others. But this is a very rare pattern that, again, is hard to see unless you point it out to a speaker. And here's one from German, just in case there are German speakers listening. This is also a pattern that probably only morphologists notice. These are nouns ending in icht, dickicht and röhricht and kehricht, and there may be 2 or 3 others of this pattern, but they were at least not in my vocabulary. This is also a rare pattern with an almost hapax affix that most speakers will actually not even notice as a suffix. And now from here on, there's only a very small step to things that have actually enjoyed a lot of fame in the linguistic literature, namely phonist themes. And what you can see here is the most famous case, the gl in English, that stands for something visual, perhaps, as in glow and glance and glare and so on. Actually, you see that the family is a lot bigger than some of the affix families I've been showing you. But still, these are items where normally people will say, now we are leaving morphology, now we're getting in the realm of phonology. This is not a morphological item. There's a wonderful paper by Kwon and Round that argue or discuss this particular question with the taking a canonical approach and making very thorough analysis of this question. So here we have really moved to the boundaries of morphology. And this was part A. So these were all situations in which the building blocks of the word were not available by themselves. So we have a reason to assume that the complex words in which they live are stored in their entirety in lexical memory. And here's situation number 2 that is actually quite similar. These are parts of complex words that have an unpredictable meaning. And if they come up in compounding, then they may be called strawberry morphs. That's this Ray's term. And strawberry morphs are actually cranberry morphs, except that they look like an existing word, but they have, as it were, the wrong meaning. So this is straw and strawberry. That has nothing to do with straw, apparently. Rasp and raspberry. Cottage cheese, probably a translation of German Hüttenkäse, but that doesn't make it much better, because why Hütte? What is polka and polka dot? What's cozy and tea cozy? What's fold and sheepfold? What's kick and sidekick? Airplane is an interesting example because plane has now gotten parsed out of this word. So now plane, of course, is a word, but that was not the case. And before that was the case, airplane is contained a strawberry morph. And the last case I collected here is chestnuts, or why chest in this word. So here again, we have the situation that one part of a complex word is not, doesn't have doesn't make a semantic contribution to the whole word. So we know we have to store those words, we have to list them. We cannot just form them from scratch. There are also strawberry morphs in derivation. These are harder to find, but gorgeous looks as if it has gorge in it. Rubbish looks like it has rub in it. Of course it doesn't. Vanish has nothing to do with van. Adultery has nothing to do with adult. I don't know. Ungainly has nothing to do with gain. So these are, again, we have roots, bound roots that have, as it were, the wrong meaning if we think they are related to a free word. If such bound meanings, as we just saw, generalize, that happens sometimes, then we get affixoids. Here are 2 very famous cases from Dutch, at least famous in the circles that work in Dutch linguistics. So here's the word hoofd, which means head, and it has now developed into an affixoid meaning main. So you get the same effect in head office, in fact. So hoofdkantoor means head office. Hoofdingang means main entrance. Hoofdstad means capital, main city, if you like. And there's another example that's a suffixoid, that is boer, which means farmer, or used to mean farmer. So you get groenteboer, vegetable farmer, but nowadays it usually means vegetable seller. So the person who sells me vegetables is normally not the person who grows them. So groenteboer would be the person where I buy my vegetables. There's visboer, fishmonger, and there's krantenboer, newspaper vendor. And here we've left this farmer meaning altogether behind. And what's important here is that neither hoofd nor boer can be used with this particular meaning outside of compounds. This is tied to compounds. This is what makes them affixoids. This has actually become a product of both of these patterns, but they started out as bound meanings, bound in to a complex structure. So this was the part where parts of a complex word had unpredictable meaning. And now comes the part, and I'll be quicker on this, where the whole word has an unpredictable meaning. And these are, of course, morphological idioms. When you think of idioms, you often think of syntactic idioms, but of course, morphology has them too. There are famous cases like honeymoon and understand. I won't say anything about those because it's clear what happens here, that these have unpredictable semantics. Two examples again from Dutch. These are again diminutives. You might know that Dutch delights in diminutives. Telefoontje looks like it means little telephone, but most of the time it actually means phone call. So if you say, I've got a telefoontje, then it means somebody called me. Oortjes looks like it means little ears, but it's actually the things I have in my ear here. So earbuds, that is the word we use. So these have an idiomatic meaning. And despite the fact that they are otherwise perfectly unremarkable diminutives. So formally, they look perfectly normal. And in fact, oortjes can also mean little ears, but nowadays it's often used in this idiomatic meaning. And what's interesting here is that this type of idiomatic meaning can also occur in inflection, so not only in derivation. So English has words like looks or brains or manners or minutes or premises or banks, and this list is actually a lot longer, where you don't get the predictable plural meaning. So looks is not just the plural of look, and brains, if somebody's got brains, that doesn't mean they have two brains, it means they are smart, and so on. Minutes are minutes of a meeting, and so on. So here we get something that some theories might not actually like or be prepared for, namely a regular inflected word that has idiomatic meaning. And of course, it doesn't have this meaning all the time. So minutes can very well mean the plural of minute. So this is something that will come up again later. We cannot be too strict here in separating the idiosyncrasies and the regularities, because we have the same words having a regular meaning and also a special meaning. Another example that is from Norwegian, which I thought interesting because it is a verb. It is the verb that looks as if it meant the passive of find. So it is found, but it has been lexicalized as the meaning to exist. In Norwegian linguistics, there is some discussion on the status of this morphological structure of these words, but they look very much like passives, and they probably are, or used to be in the past. So here again, a regular inflected word with idiosyncratic meaning. And then we are in situation C, where what's unpredictable is not the meaning, but the form. And these cases are known under the word of allomorphy, stem allomorphy here. So we start with the stems again. So English has pairs like tooth and teeth and strong and strengthen, where we have relics of umlaut. But these are lexicalized, so this is not a procedure in English that is in any way regular. So you have to know that these words have this particular pattern, that the stems change in this particular way. So you cannot form teeth from tooth, because you have to know that the form has to look exactly like this. A different thing happens in from sheep to shepherd. Here the vowel is shortened. So this is a different change, stem change. German has unpredictable stem allomorphy in the plural. So German has umlaut as a productive procedure, but for the plural with E, we have to know which words take umlaut and which words don't. So you have Grund, der Grund, that is a masculine noun meaning reason, and the plural is Gründe, but and then you have Hund, which means dog. It's also a masculine noun and it rhymes, but the plural is Hunde and not Hunde. My students are very unhappy about facts like this, but this is how German works. So here again, the stem changes in unpredictable ways. These are forms that you have to learn. And of course, you also find those in derivation. So sprechen The noun that goes with sprechen is Sprache. So here you get a stem vowel change as well. And English has pairs like foul and filth and proud and pride, where again you have an idiosyncratic form change that is specific to these particular words. So something you have to know. The extreme case, of course, of this is suppletion. So then the stem looks nothing like it looked in a pair, looks like nothing like it looked on the other side. So good and better are famous, of course, and bad and worse, but also forms like are and is. Normally, suppletion is described in inflection. Graf Corbett has a fantastic paper on this. But I have made a little longer list for suppletion in derivation, which is debatable, but actually these are quite nice cases. So English has pairs like mouth and oral and heart and cardiac and ear and auditive and so on, where you have on the left side a native word, a noun, and then the adjective is non-native, but these form very nice pairs, especially when you go to the animals. So on the right-hand side, I collected a few animal nouns and adjectives. So cat goes with feline, dog goes with canine, cattle goes with bovine, and so on. And only monkey has a different suffix here, monkey and simia. So here we see the suppletion, stem change, unpredictable stem change in a derivation. Of course, more things change here than only the stem, but this is something you have to know, that these pairs go together in this manner. And of course, you also have allomorphy and affixes. I already said something about German plurals. I showed you Grund and Gründe and Hund and Hunde, but there's a third one that is Mund, again a masculine noun, again a noun that rhymes with the others, but this one actually has a third plural that has Munde as a plural form. So these words all look the same, they all have the same gender in the singular, but they all take different plurals. Such cases are called lexical plurals. They are, you have to be listed, you have to know that the plural looks like this. And then, of course, there are also plural doublets. Laurie Bauer will actually be giving the next Aberlin talk later today or tonight. And I think he will be talking about those. So again, an example from German. So Wort has two plurals. One that actually means more the material sense of a word, and one the more content side of things, Wörter and Worte. And Mutter has a more dramatic meaning change here because it's a homophone. So Mütter is the plural, means mothers, and Mutter means nuts, like this thing that I show here on the screen. These are definitely plural forms you have to know, and you have to use the right one when you speak. And now we have arrived at situation D, where the procedure is what's not available. So not the parts, but the procedure itself. So this is unproductive morphology in the narrow sense. So just morphological patterns that are synchronically unavailable to the speaker. And there's I could have made a long list here, but I just chosen three more or less at random from English. One is the adjectival en, as in earthen and silken and wooden and golden ashen. There are a few more, but it's about a dozen, perhaps a bit more than those. So this is a very small affix family here. Cannot be productively extended as far as I know. Then there is English nominal th, as in growth and stealth. This family is a little bigger, but not much. There are some cases where we cannot be so sure as present-day speakers whether and how they belong to this group. So birth historically belongs to this group, and wealth and bath, but this is not so evident. So speakers will perhaps not associate these words with this pattern. Also a pattern that cannot be extended easily. I believe that the word kulf was formed recently, but this is a rare occasion. So this is something that happens in analogy, of course, every now and then. But nobody would call this a productive pattern, I suppose. And here's a final one that is very small and also very limited in its application. This is earn as in Eastern, Western, Northern, Southern. And these are all the combinations you have, except, of course, you can combine the directions, but these are, as the basic derivations goes, this is all you have. And so this pattern cannot be extended as long as it stays restricted to this particular type of base. So again, an unproductive procedure. And something to notice here is that unproductive patterns can be very large. So I made a little table here with, on the left-hand side, a hapax affix, laughter, that we saw before, that has 1 or 2 instances. So this is clearly not a productive pattern. Then I've given, as an example, the German pattern I showed you earlier that has 3 to maybe 5 instances, also unproductive. Then you have a pattern, for example, like English verbal ish, as in cherish or publish or vanish. There are about 40 of these verbs, not a productive pattern, borrowed morphology. But then you have patterns like this one. This is a Dutch one. I didn't show you this in detail. It's an adjectival affix, a look, that combines with nouns and verbs and adjectives. Very transparent, also very clear in what it does semantically, but it's not a productive pattern, despite the fact that there are around 400 words with this affix. And I think this is actually quite surprising, so that there is a pattern that is so large, so transparent, formally as well as semantically. We clearly see lexical bases in here. This is a native pattern. There is a big group of words that are formed with this affix, but still this is not a productive procedure. You cannot just go and extend this pattern and apply it to new words. And then, of course, on the right-hand side, we have the truly productive patterns like ing and running and so on. So this is an open-ended pattern. This is productive, but you can get very large patterns that are nevertheless unproductive, not extended by speakers. And what stops speakers from extending those patterns is, I think, a big mystery that I think linguistic theory should figure out. I think this is something we don't understand very well at the moment, at least. I don't. If you have any ideas, do let me know. And now we have gone through the first part of this talk, the types of unproductive morphology. So I've shown you some scenarios in which we are dealing with complex words that we cannot generate, we cannot produce them on the fly for all those reasons that I showed you. This was the foxy part, I said, the part with the most detail, I hope, and also a longer part, so don't be worried if you think this is going to be too long, because this is just the first of 4 points. So next off, we said we'd be looking at the theoretical challenges that are posed by these words, because they all make demands, as it were, of morphological theory. All these situations that we've been looking at. And I think they are basically 2 types of difficulties we have here. We have issues of identity and classification, and also we have issues of boundaries. These may, of course, be connected. So, for the parts that are not available, we can ask, so what's the status of cran and cranberry and gorge and gorgeous and tur and laughter? We said this already before when I drew the parallel to furnace themes, that here we are actually on the boundary between phonology and morphology. So are these things morphemes, if your theory deals in morphemes? Are they morphological units, would be a more neutral way of saying, or are they merely strings of phonemes? And how do we tell those apart? And there is actually a widespread view that is worded very nicely in Quan and Round, which is why I've quoted this in full here. So they say that the central axiom is that if a word decomposes exhaustively into n smaller units, then any single one of those units can be a morpheme, only if all are. So the problem we have here in cranberry, gorgeous, and laughter is that not all of them are morphemes, clearly morphemes. So you cannot decompose them exhaustively. So how do you deal with things like that? Theories differ very much in how they deal with those situations. Another question is, what makes a word a member of a morphological pattern? So we already very briefly touched on this issue when we talked about this nominal th. So birth and wealth and bath and filth. When you think about it, you can perhaps relate them to the verb that also goes in, is then born, or filth that goes with foul. But perhaps speakers may fail to recognize this, so they wouldn't see the morphological pattern and the relation here. And on the other hand, we have forms like plumber or carpenter that speakers may very well associate with the nominal ER pattern. I mean, they look very much like words like baker or brewer or so. They're also professions. So they match this pattern very well. And of course, we know that speakers do have this type of judgment about complex words. So Geert Boy and I, we looked at this for Dutch, actually the same pattern as in English, so nominal ER. And a couple of these words in Dutch, herder, schutter, kabouter, priester, and so on, are actually derived from forms that didn't have this ER. So herder goes back to herde. If you speak German, then you may recognize Hirte in there within, or Hirt. Schutter, it used to be schutte, but it acquired the ER because speakers apparently associated it with the ER pattern. It has the right semantics, it looked very similar, so it got associated with this pattern. And the other words are actually loan words that ended in something with a T, sometimes already a suffix, like in the Latin words, or something that in other ways resembles ER. And eventually these words got, as it were, pulled into this pattern. So nowadays they have this suffix ER, or look like they match the normal ER nouns that Dutch has. Köpke and Panther have called this Gestalt effects. So these are words that look like they have a particular affix, and then they are appropriated by this affix pattern. So I call these imposters. And for those imposter words, it's interesting to look at their grammatical behavior, whether they tell us how the grammar treats them, does treat them as members of the suffix family or not. So for Dutch, we have a little test case, namely what happens if we make these feminine, these words. So a real ER noun would normally replace ER by stir. So player, speler would become speelster, the female player. And this is something that the imposter ER nouns don't do. So herder is not herdster, but herderin. So there the feminine suffix gets attached to the entire word. It doesn't replace ER. For priester, you get priesteres, same story with a different suffix. But then again, there are also real bona fide ER nouns that also do this. So for lezer, reader, you don't get leester. Leester does appear in a different meaning. Rarely, it's a rarely used word. But the normal word for a female reader is lezeres. So again, here the grammar is not really conclusive. And we cannot be too sure how these are treated. So whether these are suffixal or not. Whether this feminization strategy tells us whether these are suffixes or not. And there are two other interesting cases where we get the opposite effect. So German also has this nominal ER, and Spieler and Leser. These are very similar to those words we just saw. And one of the typical patterns is that these take what they call zero plural. So they look in the plural just the way they look in the singular. So no affixation here. And this also happens with those imported imposter ER nouns like priester, or with other nouns like messer, which clearly don't have ER as a suffix, but still they have this zero plural. So the plural of priester is priester and the plural of messer is messer. So here the grammar doesn't differentiate between those cases that have ER as a suffix and those that don't. And a similar result is found in this other case. This has to do with gender. In German, if you have nouns that end in schwa, then these nouns are very likely to be feminine. And this seems to be independent of the fact whether the schwa is a morpheme, morphological unit, or not. So you find these in true derivations where it's clearly a morpheme, like Reise from Reisen, or Breite from breit, broad. Here we have clearly a suffix. And then you have intermediate cases like Ecke, where we have the word Eck, but still it seems kind of rare to say that is a suffix here. So sometimes in the Germanist literature, people will say this is a pseudo suffix, so it's not quite so conclusive. But Ecke is a feminine, just like Reise and Breite. So this just goes along with this general pattern. But then again, the same happens in words like Birne, pear, where E very clearly is not a suffix, but it's still a feminine noun. So this schwa means feminine rule apparently doesn't care whether this schwa is a suffix or just a piece of phonology. So here even the grammar doesn't seem to care. So if we as a theorists make a strictest division between morphology and phonology, then we are in trouble, I think, with cases like this. In the case of B, so if we have unpredictable meaning, we could ask, how do we capture the fact, theoretically capture the fact that we clearly see honey and moon and honeymoon. We see these words in here, but we disregard this relation in the interpretation of this word. How do we do this? How is this word stored in our memory to make this happen? For C, for the unpredictable form, we can ask, so how do we capture the fact that allomorphs are not identical, but they're nevertheless related? So they're the same, but they're not the same. So strong and strength are, of course, in a way the same, but in a way not the same. Good and better, even more dramatically so. And also the S in cities and the EN in oxen also have a way of being the same and a way of not being the same. So how do we capture these in our ideas about the lexicon and the morphology and morphological structure? And also, if you remember this case, Grund, Gründe, Hund, Hunde, how do we capture the fact that these are both regular plurals, but they're also idiosyncratic because they have to be listed. You have to know which of the two plurals, which of the words take. So what do you do with items, complex items that are both regular and idiosyncratic at the same time? And finally, if the procedure is not available, so if we're dealing with unproductive morphology proper, what exactly distinguishes productive from unproductive patterns? And what kind of knowledge does this entail on the part of the language user? Of course, this is a very big question that I think many people are thinking about. Currently, it's a hot topic, productivity. But this is a question we have to ask. I won't have a conclusive answer on that, obviously, but I will try to say something about it as we go to the theory. So now we are, oh no, I have one more slide on the theoretical problems. Yes, a more general slide. So what we can conclude up to here is that lexical listedness clearly doesn't mean absence of grammatical structure. We've all seen words that have to be listed for some reason or another, but that still have grammatical structure. And if you have a theory, especially in psycholinguistic theory, this used to be the case, that makes a divide between storage of parts and online computation on the one hand, or holistic storage of full form on the other, then you have a problem with items like this. So I think what we need is a theory that allows for the listing of complex words with internal structure. And also, as I hope to have convinced you by now, that we need a theory in which lexicon and grammar are very tightly integrated. And here we are really squarely in hedgehog country. So, Ray and I have been thinking about these issues for a long time, and we dreamed up the outlines of a theory that we hope can take care of some of the issues we've been seeing. We call this theory relational morphology because relations are absolutely central. Sorry for plugging the book again, but if you're interested, have a look. There's a lot more in here. It's a sister theory, I said already, of construction morphology, so it has many things in common with Geert Boy's theory about morphology. And I won't dwell on the differences here today. That doesn't matter for our purposes. The theory is based on the parallel architecture by Ray Jackendoff, which has as the general principle that linguistic knowledge, in fact, all knowledge, is organized in levels of structure. For linguistic knowledge, you have semantics, morphosyntax, phonology, orthography, and others. And what's important is that these structures are independent. So none of these layers, as it were, is derived from the other. They are independent, but of course they are related. You can map them onto one another. So if I have a word like reader, it has all those layers, so it has semantics. I'm keeping the semantics very simple here. Ray has a much smarter way of doing semantics, but it gets very technical then, and I wanted to keep it accessible. So a reader is perhaps a person who reads. This word has morphosyntactic structure. It has a verb, verbal base, and a suffix, and it's a noun as a whole. It has a particular phonology and a particular orthography, of course. And we want to say that all of these layers are associated with one another. So if I hear reader, then I'm entitled to call up the rest of this knowledge in my mind, because these often go together. So there's associated structure here, and we say this means there are interface links between these levels. And we can draw lines, and I will be drawing lines in a second. But if you do it properly, it's better to use co-indexation, so little numbers or letters, because then you can exactly show what's connected with what. But I will keep it more or less simple here, because I want to make the bigger, draw the bigger picture. But I'll stick with the numbers just for a second. So here's another, which is the word read, the verb, simplified, because for the verb you also need arguments and everything. I've left those out. So again, we have co-indexation, interface links between the levels, the semantics, the morphosyntax, the phonology, and the orthography. And we could have added more levels. But what we can add now is a different type of link, and we call those relational links, because we can want to say that the stem read comes back in reader. So it's the same stem that we find in the verb, we also find in the noun. So we're using this co-indexation here with a little 2 to say that these are the same structure. So this is not associated structure, like for the interfaces. This is the same structure. And we can mark those same structures across words. And when we've done this, we can also co-index the suffix, the interface links for the suffix. This is a little 3. If you're worried why there's no 3 in the semantics, I apologize, because this is a difficult story and I don't want to make it too long. So I skipped this. Look in the book if you want to know. But from here on out, I'll mostly be using the shortcut notation that also Geert Boy notes uses. So I'll be giving things in a line, and sometimes with numbers if they matter, and sometimes not, just to make things more readable. So here again, we see the structure and we see those indices marking what belongs together. And now, of course, there are lots of words that go with this particular pattern, a reader, speaker, but also teacher. And what we can do then is we can generalize it into a schema. Here's the schema. And the schema says that there are verbs, nouns with a verbal base that mean person who exists. So the schema has exactly the same structure as the words underneath. With one exception, it has variables. It has a variable for the verbal stem. And as you see, we are using letters, letter indices instead of number indices to indicate the variables. So to make clear that this is a variable here. So there's a little y and a little x here that show this. So these schemas are very important in this theory because they replace the rules of grammar. Of course, this has something that already has been done for syntax long before Geert Boy, and also we later started doing this for morphology. And then it's called construction grammar. And of course, you know, probably know all about it. But we also do this in morphology. And what's important is that These schemas are not procedures, like rules are procedures. So they don't tell you add this or replace that. They are first and foremost generalizations over known words. So they say this language has this particular structure. And that means they aren't automatically committed to productivity. A unproductive rule is a bit of an embarrassment if you say add this, but you can't do it productively. But if it's a schema, if you just say this pattern exists, then you are not, you have no obligation to imply that this is a productive procedure. So this is a good thing if you think of those cases that we've been seeing. So what does the schema do? It tells us that the structure of these words is not arbitrary. So this is not the structure of the words that are associated with the schema have a certain makeup, and this is not arbitrary. This is a regular structure. This is, of course, how the schema arose in the first place. And this function is called motivation. This is a term that actually goes back already to de Saussure, who has a famous quote about arbitrary structure and a much less famous quote about motivation. But we are taking up this term here to say that the schema makes structure less arbitrary. And what's, again, an important point here is that motivation is non-directional. So it doesn't only go from the schema down to the words, but it can also go from the words to the schema and also between the words. So motivation holds between all layers or all items in this structure here. And if it is horizontal between words, then we call these sister links. I'll have something to say about sister links in a second. And something else that you cannot do easily with rules, but you can do with schemas, is motivation can be partial. So I can hang the word plumber or the word carpenter under the ER schema because I associate them with one another. They have lots of things in common. But they are not completely motivated the way reader is motivated. For a rule, I cannot partially generate a word, but I can partially motivate a word with a schema. So this is something schemas can do that I think rules cannot do in this elegant way. So here we have 4 tools. We have schemas as generalizations. We have interface and relational links that can be very specific, saying what's linked to what. We have partial motivation and we have sister links. And I think with these, we can try to make sense of at least some of the quirky cases that we've been seeing. So schemas as generalizations, these fit very well with those unproductive schemas like earthen, EN, or growth, TH, or earn and eastern. Here it makes no sense to posit a rule because it's a non-extendable pattern. But why not pose a schema? This is a pattern that you can see and that you can generalize over. And since motivation organizes the lexicon, it's a good thing, even though it's not. It's just even if it's only for a small pattern. Specific links help if you have an idiomatic structure. So for honeymoon, and now I'm using the full notation again to show you this in more detail, we have perfectly regular morphosyntax, phonology, and orthography. We can map those onto one another. And the only thing that does not map is the semantics. And that's why there's no 10 and 11 here in this semantic notation. Only 12 that ties together the parts on the outside, as it were. So if you have idiomatic meaning, it means, and regular structure, it means you can have interface links everywhere except for the semantics. Same thing in allomorphy, and I haven't worked this out in detail because it looks complicated. You can say allomorphs have linkage in semantics and in morphosyntax, but only partially in morphology, or perhaps not at all if you are dealing with suppletion. So we can separate out the layers and say exactly what's connected in what way. Partial motivation we already saw, And this is handy if you have cranberry morse or strawberry morse, or in fact bound roots. I haven't shown it for the bound roots here. So here's the berry part of the network that has blackberry and gooseberry as fully motivated, perfectly related items. But it can also have strawberry, because some of the parts, these are matched between this noun and the pattern. And you can also link strawberry to straw, but I've drawn a thinner line here, dotted line, because the connection is only in morphosyntax and in phonology, not in semantics. And cranberry is even less connected, because here we don't have anything to link cran to. So we can have different degrees of relatedness here. And I think this is exactly what we see in the data. So this is what our model should be able to accommodate. For the root families, and now I'm almost done. For the root families, what we can do, of course, is posit sister links. So we can link these, as it were, horizontally by co-indexing the base, saying the base is the same. But we are not forced to posit a mother. So we don't have to put hor in there to hold those together, because motivation works always. We can also use sister links here. And then we can do without a lexical base for hor, which we would have to stipulate only to take care of these examples. And then was the really weird case of or and it, as in horror, horrid, and splendor and splendid. These are both patterns that can be generalized. They don't have a lexical basis, so I have an X here. I can't say whether they take nouns or verbs, because none of these are real words. But I can say that they take the same base. So I can use this Y here to say what's the base on the left-hand side is also the base on the right-hand side. It's not always the case that you have full partnership, as it were. So there are some cases that only occur on one side and not on the other. But you can make this generalization here over these two patterns, because there are enough of these cases to see this if you look for it. This is a situation that has been called second-order schemas by Geert Boye and Francesca Massini. We call them sister schemas because it's actually not more than the sister links on the word level. You can also get them on the schema level, and this is what we see here, one level up, as it were. All right, so I promised to integrate, and this is just one slide. What do we do with productive morphology? Well, we've already seen productive morphology because our ER schema is productive in English. I can make new words. So what I'm doing now, I'm using Zoom. I'm a Zoomer. That's probably a word that has been used a lot recently. But this was a new word at some point. And this can be produced by the schema because the variables are open. This is a variable that accepts new material. We say it's an open variable. So what we then get eventually is a schema with listed instances because they have special meaning. For example, sleeper. It can be a person who sleeps, but also a sleeping car. And also new instances. So here we see motivation, but also generation together in one network. So we can take care of both situations here. Okay, so here's the last slide, a little summary. I hope to have shown you in a lot of foxy detail that lexical items show a complex interplay of regularity and idiosyncrasy, and that morphological theory, I think, should take responsibility for this fact. So what we want is a theory that allows for a listing of complex words with internal structure, and for a theory in which lexicon and grammar are tightly integrated. And I think where we've arrived at is that the stored structures form the basis of linguistic knowledge, and that actually productivity is an add-on. Ray used to say that productive schemas are ordinary schemas gone viral. So now we've turned things upside down. Instead of a big generative engine with a little lexicon on top, we have a big lexicon with a little generative engine on top. Some people might get offended by this, but I think if you look at morphology the way we've done today, then this is a conclusion you cannot avoid. Thank you very much for listening.
Yeah, thank you so much for a great talk, Jenny. Now I'm gonna, there are some questions in the chat. So one of them is Giuseppe asks if there's any difference between relational links among stored items in relational morphology and inheritance from unary branching constructions in theories like HBSG, right? So both seem to do the work of redundancy rules, right? That redundancy rules used to do.
Thank you. That is a very good question. I'm not an expert on HPSG, but I can answer. I can say something about the difference between our links and true inheritance links. Inheritance is a top-down type of linkage, so it's from the schema down to the instances. You always have an ancestor, and you have something that inherits, and we don't have that. Not necessarily. I said that in a motivational can go always. It can also be horizontal between words of the same structure, same degree of structure, where it doesn't make sense to say that one is the ancestor of the other, or one is higher up in the network or so than the other. So I think this is a more inclusive, it includes what inheritance does, but it is a little more, because it can, especially the sister links, I think a powerful device that are needed in morphology. There's a lot of literature now coming up on horizontal connections in constructional theory. So there's a recent special issue in word structure, and there are more people now thinking about these issues, and I think this is worth doing.
Another question is, okay, so like if we can suppose that for a functional, there's a functional role for having like unproductive patterns so that they may become productive in the future, and yeah, so it's like a little bit difficult to parse the question, but if like, could it be like one of the sort of like programs that the mind has so to update itself over time?
Sorry, I think I've missed the question.
Yeah, so the question is like I think it's about the functional role of having, if you think that's the case, that there's a
so what are they good for?
like keeping like unproductive rule patterns, schemas in the lexicon.
Oh, good. Thank you. Yes, of course they can get productive, but I think that's nothing that the mind will anticipate or prepare for. But what they're also good for, of course, is that they organize the lexicon. And I think we are pattern finding animals. And once we found a pattern, we can reify it in a schema. Why not store that schema? And Ray and I have an idea that schemas, of course, aren't stored blindly in a way. So we think they deteriorate if they aren't used. So there's a processing theory that goes with this general theory I've laid out. So if a pattern doesn't get called up regularly, then you'll forget it. It will sink into oblivion at some point. But what they do, the main function is they organize the lexicon. So they make sense of the store of words that you have in your mind. And they're good for that, no matter whether they are productive or not, because that's the motivating function, and every schema has this function.
Another question is about the distinction between productive and unproductive patterns. And so it prefaces the question by saying that to complement these schemas, we need a theory of when a schema becomes productive on a per speaker basis, maybe. And so the question is, what do you think of current theories that are around for that? For example, Charles Yang's theory on based on the tolerance principle.
Yeah, Ray. If Ray was here, and I think he is listening, but if he was here in the chat, he would have more to say about Charles Yang. I cannot answer this, I think, in a way that he could. But I think we are still productivity is still very much of a mystery, I think. So especially in our sense, what we think is that you first start out with a schema, your positive schema, you find a regularity, and then at some point you upgrade this to a productive schema. So you find out, hey, this is not just a generalization, this is something you can actually use to form new words. But so for us, the question would be, what causes the upgrade? And of course, there are ideas about that. So a certain spread of the items that you have, they shouldn't be just in one corner of the lexicon, but they should be spread out, and they should have some maybe semantic regularity and so on. But I think none of the factors that we have are single give a single explanation on when this happens. So if I just may recall this one example from Dutch, where I have 400 types of a perfectly regular, productive, regular, well-spread, transparent pattern, and still it's not productive. And I would love to know what any theory has to say about those, because I find this a mystery, truly. So, but it's absolutely a topic that people should be thinking about and are thinking about in very interesting directions.
Yeah, I think related to that, but in the domain mostly of inflectional morphology, there's a question about like whether relational morphology provides any sort of understanding of why and how paradigmatic gaps come to exist.
That is a tough one. I'm thinking about paradigms in this theory at the moment. So this is something that is, as it were, under construction. I think something that we should say is that we are starting bottom up rather than top down. So we are, the things that are in our lexical network are things that we have heard, so, or inferred. So there has to be, it's like the store of visual imagery in my mind is what I have seen in my life. So this store of words in my lexicon is the store of words I have heard and the generalization I've made over those. So the bigger question here is, of course, is how about absences? We cannot code absences in this theory. So if something is absent because I haven't heard it accidentally, or is there a reason to say this is absent for a particular reason? I'm not sure how we would deal with those, because this is the architecture is bottom up. So we deal with those things that you have heard and generalized over. So how you can distinguish a meaningful gap or a systematic gap from an accidental gap is a hard question. I'm not sure if Ray would have something to say about it. I'm not sure how we could deal with those very well.
There's a clarification question about the use of about the category labels like N and V in the schemas. And so it's asking about why they are considered variables in schemas, or why there is a variable there, and if it wouldn't be possible to decompose these labels into features, right? I guess the example that they give is a scheme for Earth that has a V variable, but it's not clear if zoom in zoomer has a verbal or a nominal base.
Yeah, there are different issues here, various issues here, I think. The first is the variable. The variable is there because the base is here's a productive variable, so it accepts new material. So it's a generalization. So if I take all those words that end in ER, then I see one part that is always the same, that's the ER, then there's one part that's always different, and that part can be generalized into a variable. It can be nothing else than that because it's always different in the various words. Why we use category labels rather than features, or the question about zoom and nominal and verbal. I think this is actually a fact about English, that nouns and verbs are as stems are hard to distinguish, and I wouldn't want to explain this away by using features. This is, I think, a fact of a language that is in itself interesting, that for the cases like that, it's especially because there's also massive conversion in English, it's very hard to tell the nouns and the verbs apart. I don't think we win a lot with replacing category labels by features. Category labels are well-respected animals in descriptive morphology and typology. Of course, in typology, they're also debated in various ways, but we haven't touched this. We have taken this as given. And I don't think the featural split up would help us very much here, or would make things easier. And I think it would add questions, actually. So what features to use and how to combine them. But we have left those alone.
Right. I have a question about like Jennifer Hayes' relative base hypothesis, right? So I guess it like connects to the question of like bound stems in your framework, because so if I'm not mistaken, her like the hypothesis would suggest that since in the case of bound stems, like the whole word, like for instance, cranberry, is always more like frequent than the bound stem, of course, because the bound stem cannot be used freely. then the theory would predict that these words would never be decomposed by speakers online, right? And so, and maybe then they would like be, then these connections would deteriorate over time. And so this connection would not be in the speaker's knowledge.
But we see this relation. We see the cran and cranberry because we see the berry in cranberry. So, I mean, I love the idea, and I think it's right, that structure is a graded notion, because structure is something you have to see, and you have to impose structure. And actually, we also believe that there are inter-speaker difference. I'm sure there are speakers who see more patterns than others. If you're a morphologist, you see patterns that you would never have noticed as an ordinary language user. So this is not, a structure is not a given. Structure is something you see, and structure is imposed by seeing relations. So if I see the relation between cranberry and blackberry, then I have decomposed I have analyzed the word. And I have trouble with the word decomposition, because decomposition can mean different things. It can mean I can see the boundaries, or I take them apart. And this is the second part, is the one where I wouldn't follow. So I can parse the word. It doesn't mean I tear it apart and store only the parts. This is not how this theory works. I know there are theories that do it like that. They have other problems, I think. So, but structure as a graded notion, and structure depending on relation, I think is something that is perfectly in line with Jennifer Hayes' theory, and something also that is worth looking at further. So structure is not a given. Structure always rests on perceived relations.
Mm-hmm. So would you predict there to be morphological priming if the same bound stem occurs in another word with the same bound stem?
Oh yeah, people see patterns everywhere. People see patterns that even I would not, would be too foxy for me to include here as morphology. I mean, we know that priming happens in cases where we might not even have expected where nobody would posit morphological structure, and still you see priming there. So absolutely.
Okay. There's another question by Luke Bradley. He was wondering about Susan Gall's and Harold Bayan's objection to phonological identity in some cases. So, for instance, there are consistent acoustic differences between the cap you wear in your head and the cap in captain, or the straw of strawberry and the straw that we drink. And wouldn't this lack of acoustic identity upset the schemas, right? So, or if we're not basing ourselves too much on the orthography to do that.
And also I've shown the phonology. We should have added a phonetic layer, and the phonetic layer in our view is closer to gestural, perhaps. So we try to keep, this is also in the book, and I can't do it justice in a short, in just a minute, but we have different layers for phonetics and phonology, and I think things happen on the phonetic layer. And we also have the representation quite distinct. So phonetics is not just, it's not very similar. So you could represent your phonetics, for example, as gestures, articulatory gestures, and then you have them further apart, and then you could, or as auditory, however you call auditory signals, and then you can code those things. But I haven't shown this, and we haven't worked this out in detail. We do have a chapter in the book on phonology and morphology, so on the interplay there. We don't go very deeply into phonetics. This is not our field, but this is where I would look for those. So this would again be partial relations. So the phonology is related, but the phonetics is different, I suppose.
Let me see if there are more questions here. Okay, so can you comment more about the idea that, so I know that in the book there's some comments about the implausibility of rules as cognitive, as part of the cognitive, as part of the mental lexicon, right? Can you comment more on this idea?
We are using schemas instead of rules that has, of course, that has to do with the general architecture of the model. This is a model in which grammar and lexicon are not separated. So for us, the schema, I mean, we call them schemas also to say that they are not just a notational variant of rules. They are actually different because they are not instructions. If you take rules literally, then they tell you take this thing, add or change this thing, and then you get that thing. So they're procedural. And for us, the whole network is declarative. So these are statements. So this is a totally different architecture. And so what we are normally asked to say is, how can your schemas do the same work as rules? And I think they can do the same work, because if they're productive, you can unify the rule with the schema with new material, the variables, and then you get new words. But they can do more, because they can also do this motivation. And I think if you want a rule to have a motivational function, you have to take the concept of a rule less literally, because you're not actually deriving something. You are just saying, okay, this looks like this thing. So I think the schema notation is a bit more honest, so we can take our metaphors a little more seriously here. That's why I think a schema is a better concept.
There's another question about the distinction between productive and unproductive schemas, right? And so if the asker can clarify later, please. But as I understand, what they are asking is about this, what's the nature of this difference? If it's like a categorical difference, right? So I think in the book, there's the suggestion that you have open and closed variables. And what about the intermediate steps between those two endpoints?
Yeah, that is a very good question that also comes up often, and it's a bit difficult to answer, because we use open and close more or less categorical, because we say that the main difference is the question, do I have to know which words fall under a schema, or can I just extend it at will? So everything that falls in between, so I extend it, but I have the intuition of forcefulness or of creativity or of bending the rules somehow. Whether this is a different notion than ordinary productivity or not, I mean, this is of course hotly debated in the literature. We are definitely not the first to think about this. And also because we have several layers of schema, so there's not just one schema on the top, but there can be sub-schemas in between, and perhaps those are where the productive function sits. And also we have a less categorical distinction between a schema, productivity by means of a schema, and productivity by means of analogy. So if I'm taking one word as a model for another, these are all using the same network architecture. So in that sense, things get less strict. So I hope we are putting everything that is gradual in this architecture, and then we can keep open and closed more or less categorical. But I'm not sure if this is the right way to go. But this is what we have done in the book, perhaps for want of better ideas. But I think there are more ways to skin a cat here. So you can let open and close be categorical, but then you still have flexibility in the network, because words can come into existence in various ways.
Yeah. Okay, so I have another question about the nature of like phoneme themes, right? So, and the question is, what exactly distinguishes them from some cases like, oh, scoundrel, mongrel, where it seems that in both cases you have like some piece of phonology that has some sort of consistent but vague meaning, right? Yeah, so why in the case of phoneme themes, would you say that they are morphological too? Like maybe I missed something, but it seems that you said that they are purely phonological, right? And so then why? What would that, what?
I wouldn't want to be committed either way. So again, everybody who's interested in this, I refer to this fantastic paper by Kwon and Round, where they say you have to, for this question, so they have a very nice way of saying this, so that these things, like ordinary morphological units on phoneme themes, are neither sufficiently distinct nor sufficiently overlapping to really decide on whether they are the same thing or different things, except by just saying, okay, my theory decrees this. So what is, I think the best thing to do here is take a canonical approach and say, so what is a canonical morpheme, and how do these forms deviate from this? And we could do the same with our unproductive morphology. So we could say, okay, and how far do these entities deviate from a canonical morphological unit or morpheme? And I think anything that presses a decision here is theoretically motivated and is probably not doing, or has requires some force, theoretical force, to separate things that are really gradual. And also, it's a perfectly, I mean, the grammar may not even mind the distinction. You know, as I've shown you for the imposters, sometimes the grammar just doesn't care whether something is a morphological unit or just a string of phonemes. I think this is an interesting fact that we should also take care of in our theory. And it's also, if I may just add something that is wildly off tangent, but if you're doing sign language, then you are in even deeper waters there with the distinction between phonology and morphology. So I think there is, these things shouldn't be treated lightly.
Right. Okay. Another question prefaced by just to play devil's advocate. You stated that one motivation for unproductive schemas is to organize the mental lexicon, right? And so representing the like PH affix as such would help us with storage and processing of the words, right? But the question is, are our powers of memory so weak that we need extra help to organize a tiny group of 10 words?
Oh, actually, I think this is a sign of a strong memory, because it means we have noticed this relation and then we have stored it. I mean, if we don't call this up again, it will disappear and we'll forget about it. But I think there's actually people are mostly asking quite the opposite, saying, why do you think people see this pattern? And some people may not see the pattern. But when I see it, why shouldn't I store it? I mean, we see patterns everywhere and we have the habit of remembering them. I think that is what is helping us organize in life and in the world. And so that the same should be true also for the lexicon. I think it's actually a case for quite the opposite, so to say this, because it enriches the representation by having this schema.
I see. I guess that relates to another question I had, which is like, if by doing that, we would not be more like describing the linguist's mental lexicon, that the linguists like are used to noticing these regularities.
Oh, yeah.
But maybe you don't need, like, I don't know if you agree that maybe we don't need to posit that schema for, every speaker of the language, but some do notice, some do not, right?
Absolutely not. So I would say what is the basis are the words and that we know, everybody's vocabulary, and all the generalizations are optional. If I'm a wonderful pattern finder, then I'm sure I see not only in linguistics, but also in other walks of life. I see patterns everywhere. We know people who do this. Perhaps we are people who do this. If you're a morphologist, you're surely trained in seeing patterns that nobody else would. But I think also among non-linguists, there are absolutely different. It may also matter whether you write your language or not, and what patterns you see and how far you store them. I think this is really something that there can be marked differences between speakers. I would certainly not impose those things on every speaker. So especially because we also think that as generalizations go higher, they are get more optional. There's also a difference that we have with rule-based accounts, that mostly they start from the top, and the most general rules, the most interesting. And for us, the lower rules do more of the work, and they get we may have questions about these higher generalizations, what work they do. So this is also a different approach to linguistic knowledge. I think also a bigger issue here. So I'm perfectly sure there are big differences between people in this respect.
Okay, are there any more questions? I don't see any more questions. So, yep. I think it's a good time to wrap up. So thank you so much, Professor Jackendoff Audring, for your great talk. And thanks to the audience for your participation and for all your questions. And I also take this moment to stress the importance of joining the Brazilian Linguistics Association as a way of strengthening our field and making other events like this possible. and keep watching and sharing the other talks in the series. Now I'll hand you over to Professor Audrey in case she has any closing words. Bye.
Thank you very much, Manu, for chairing. Thank you very much, Miguel, for all the incredible work you've been putting into this lecture series. And thank you, everybody, for listening and for asking questions. Thank you. Bye-bye.